an ordinary couple may have sex once a week, Friday night, Saturday night. That's kind of it. Having sex 2 times a week, it messes with the paradigm because you have jobs, you have lives, you're busy, you got kids, and there's lots of excuses, lots of reasons not to have sex. But what I say twice a week because it keeps it a priority, and it also keeps it a part of the schedule more than just on the weekends.
Episode number 85. You can get all the show notes and resources at dadhackers.us/085. What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Now, Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God has created and called us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. Now, on this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive deep into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, a Christian husband, a Christian father, and a Christian leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale and experiences of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm so thankful that you've joined us today. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of our value-packed episodes. Also, please make sure you leave an honest review if you're listening to this in iTunes or any other platform that takes reviews. Reviews boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I also wanted to let you know that we do have a free private Facebook group just for Christian dads. So after the show, make sure you hop on over to the show notes. There's a link for that in there as well. Arron, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show again. Last time we talked, it was an excellent conversation, and we'll be back on the show again because you're doing some pretty cool stuff with marriages, and I think it's some information that the guys need to hear. So, Arron, you preach at a church, you do a lot of stuff there. You've written multiple books, and now marriage coaching. I'm curious, as we jump right in, why marriage coaching? Why now?
Well, sure, yeah. Thanks for having me on your show too. I appreciate it. I, as a minister, did counseling all the time. It's just as part of premarital counseling, that kind of thing. And probably about 20 years ago, I did premarital counseling for a couple, and he owned his own business, which was a network of doctors. And he liked what I did, so he brought me in to do some marriage camps for his group. And that started people calling me and doing marriage coaching. And I used to do it just over the phone, but with technology, I now do it through Zoom or FaceTime or one of those platforms. Mm-hmm. And it's exploded, just word of mouth. And I do about 4 to 6 sessions a week. I'm a full-time minister, and I don't want to infringe on my time at the church. So I'll talk to people in the morning, early, late at night, lunch break, days off. And it's, I do it because I believe in helping couples. And I feel like it's really good use of my time. So yeah, it's something I didn't go looking for. It's kind of just happened, and it's kind of exploded recently in a good way, and keeps me busy. Mm-hmm. And I really get a chance to help couples in a really meaningful way.
That's great, man. That's great. Yeah. Definitely would keep you busy. I can definitely see that. And you're kind of in a different season in life now than you were maybe 10, 15 years ago. Like, how many kids do you still have at home?
I have good question, Patrick. I have my oldest daughter has 2 kids of her own, and we're actually going to go see them tomorrow. And they live on a ranch. He's a cowboy. And I have a son who's at Abilene Christian University, and then 2 kids still at home. One's a junior, Silas is a junior, and Peyton is a sophomore. I'm at a stage of life where I have a lot of experience. My wife and I have been married, it'll be 29 years next week.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so I've got a
You're
lot
at
of
least
experience.
30, right?
Yeah, exactly, dude. Yeah, so we have a lot of experience. And so I'm in a stage of life where that experience mixed with the platform that I already had as a writer and as a minister, it's opened up a lot of doors for me to start this coaching. And what typically happens is, I get lots of referrals through word of mouth, and then I'll go do a marriage conference or speak at an event. And then usually after that, there's a surge of people who want to talk. And I typically talk to a couple, maybe 3 or 4 times. In rare occasions, it'll be over months. But usually it's about 3 or 4 times, and it kind of gets them tweaked. And then it's not uncommon for them to contact me a year or so later and want to talk again. So that's kind of what happens is I'll talk to a couple 3 or 4 times, we'll get it worked out, and then I probably won't hear from them for a year or two. But it happens all the time where couples call me back and say, hey, we need help again. We got off the tracks and need help getting back on the right course. So, but yeah, I'm in a stage of life when I can do this, and I think I have the credibility. And thankfully, my church is cool with me using my spare time, my off time to do that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because not everybody, well, you have the experience, and now in the season of life that you're in, you're not so much in the trenches as a father. I mean, you still need to be available, but your schedule is such that you have more flexibility in the time to do that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And what would you say is maybe unique about the approach that you take with couples when you're doing this marriage coaching?
Good question, man. I think people talk to me because I'm really direct. I'm not a counselor. I do marriage coaching. A counselor, will spend 3 months trying to figure out how the color yellow makes you feel. And I could not care less how the color yellow makes you feel. I just want to help you in your marriage. And I think people really appreciate my direct approach. Also, it's very practical. And the principles that I share are proven and they work. And I mean, they think I'm a genius, and I'm not. It's just that couples the problems are so similar. It's like, there's so many times I hear it and I'm like, okay, they think they're the most dysfunctional couple on the face of the planet, but they're not. And so, yeah, I think people talk to me because I can help them understand you're not crazy, you're not dysfunctional. Everybody's got stuff they're dealing with, and it's very practical. And it's and I hold them to it. Like, I have a high level of accountability as far as like homework. And if they're not taking the process seriously, I will stop meeting with them. And so I think they understand that I take it seriously. They take it seriously. They're invested. I'm invested. And but I think the biggest answer to your question is just that it's just really practical principles, like very practical. And I don't mess around. I don't beat around the bush. And if a guy's being pathetic, I'll tell him he's being pathetic. Or if whatever, I just call things as I see them. And I set the tone when I set the ground rules when I start meeting with couples to let them know that kind of what to expect. And I'm not harsh, I'm loving, but I am direct, and we move things along. And also too, it's cool to see that how God works in this process, because I'd be a joke doing this without God. So it's a regular occurrence where I'll be talking to somebody and I'll say something, and I know it's just God giving me some direction, something they need to hear, because their reaction is like, "How did you know that?" And it was like, I'm a genius. No, it's like, I was like, no, we prayed before we started talking, and God is going to fight for your marriage harder than you will, because you made a promise to him. You made a vow, and he's all about keeping vows. And if you guys will work, he'll do his part, but he's going to fight for you too. So I've seen it happen again and again.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you brought up about people being dysfunctional. I think lots of times in our marriages, we think we're the only ones suffering like this. A lot of other people have, fabulous marriages. Look at them. We're the ones with the issue. Or you go the other extreme and you just look at train wrecks in the media of marriage, and we don't even have to go there. But I think that's a tactic that the devil uses, is he tries to isolate you and make you feel like you're alone. You're the only one. You should be ashamed, and everybody's gonna reject you, and nobody's gonna accept you if they actually knew that your marriage was struggling. And I'm sure as men, there's a lot of pride wrapped up in there. Like, I'm not going to admit that I'm having marriage problems. But you talk about these proven principles.
Hey, Patrick, let me stop you for just 1 second, because you made a good point. Guys, often guys don't want to go to counselors because they talk about their feelings, and they think they're going to be sitting on a couch and crying the whole time. And I think that's one of the reasons guys like talking to me, is because I approach it as a coach. And most guys at some point in their life have been coached and they get it. And so I think guys, you're exactly right. I think some guys, they're reluctant to get help because they do think they're crazy, think they're alone, think they're, the most dysfunctional husband or father. But I think that's one of the things that works for me, is that guys tend to like me, and that helps the process, because I can't do what I have to do only talking to one of them. If I'm only talking to one of the people without ever talking to them as a couple or the other party, it's really wasted my time. And I tell them that. I was like, hey, if you're both not going to talk to me, I'm not going to do this, because I'm about getting marriages together. If you want a life coach, that's one thing, but I'm a marriage coach. And so if you want your marriage worked on, and so I think my approach appeals to guys because they get it and they appreciate it. Someone who shoots them straight.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sorry I didn't interrupt you, but I thought you made a good point.
Oh, no. I always like hearing those extra tidbits there. And I think you're right. A lot of guys don't want to waste time. They want to be efficient. They want to be effective. They want to get right to the point. They don't want you to beat around the bush. They just want you to say, here's what I'm seeing. Here's what you need to do.
Yep.
And that kind of gets back to the question that I was about to ask. Was, you mentioned these proven principles that work. What are some of those principles? You mind sharing some of them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Some of the things I hit a lot are boundaries, roles, and expectations. And I present those as a package. That so much of what happens in relationships is those aren't clarified. And those three things are like three legs of a stool that you need to have in place for it to work properly. So, boundaries would be, like, say I'm working with a couple and they work together. Boundaries would be, okay, you need to have clear boundaries around your work life, around your personal life, around your sex life. I mean, all the key areas of your life, you need to have really good boundaries, because if you don't, then you're in bed working on projects and wondering why you're stressed out all the time and why you're not having sex. So I'm really big on having really clear boundaries, roles, who's going to do what at any given time, who's going to lead out with the kids at this time, who's going to lead out with, whatever. It's just knowing in any given situation who's going to be leading out. Yeah, like, for example, dinner time. I can't cook. All right. And I don't think it's a woman's job to cook, but in our home, my wife will do that. And so, but when we sit down at dinner, so just in our situation, like a typical night, the roles would be, Rhonda makes an awesome dinner. We sit down and I lead a prayer time, and we may sing a song, whatever, but the kids aren't looking to Rhonda to lead that time. They just know through the years that it's what I do. And then we have a conversation. And then when dinner's over, the roles switch, where I help clean up the table and do the dishes. And, but that's been established over years. But say, for example, Rhonda makes dinner every night, and she just does it because we assume she's going to do it. It's never been clarified. And then she starts to resent it. And then we just kind of think, oh, who's going to do the dishes? Well, so-and-so is going to do the dishes. And then when it doesn't happen, then you have fights. Okay. And that's really important, so that you clarify boundaries, roles. And it's not about, like, it's bigger than who pays the bills. It's just looking at the big picture and what's going to make every situation work. It's like knowing in a football game who's going to carry the ball at any given time. It's not always a quarterback, but you need to know who's carrying it, because otherwise you're going to fumble. And then the third thing, expectations, dude. This is huge. This is big with any relationship, with parents and kids, husbands and wives. And expectations are, so you and your wife, let me just lay this out. So anytime you and your wife interact with each other, there are at least 6 levels of expectations, okay? You have your expectations of what you're going to do in that situation. You have your expectations of what your wife's going to do in that situation. And then you have your expectations of what you guys are going to do as a couple, and vice versa. In any given situation, she's got her expectations for what you're going to do, what she's going to do, what you're personally going to do, and then what you guys are going to do as a couple. So say you're going into Saturday morning, okay? And you're thinking, I'm going to get up, eat some breakfast, go to the gym, and then I'm going to go prep for my podcast, Well, say your wife is like, oh, I can't wait for Saturday morning. We're going to get up, go to the park, have lunch together, spend the afternoon working on projects around the house. Okay, if you guys don't clarify that, you're going to have a fight. Somebody's going to get frustrated. You're going to have an argument because you didn't clarify the expectations. So I'm really big with couples on practicing these principles of, first of all, setting a weekly game plan where we'll sit down every Sunday night and before we watch something on Netflix or whatever after church, and we'll sit down and we will plan the week. And as a spiritual leader, I will start the conversation. I'll say, hey, Rhonda, what's your week look like? And we put all the big rocks in. Date night, time for her to work out, time for her to have private time, whatever she needs. And then she'll be like, hey, well, so-and-so has practice this night and I have to work late this night. And can you help me with this? Can you make sure the kids are here? Hey, the kids have a concert, this, whatever. So we get all those things on a calendar and I write it down, put on my calendar. And then vice versa, I'll go and say, well, here's what's going on with me. I got church on Sunday. We got an elders meeting Monday night. I got some marriage coaching right now on this morning. And then this night, I'm going to do marriage coaching until 7 o'clock. But how about after that, we watch our show or go out and get some ice cream. And then I'm doing this podcast on Thursday. It's going to rock, So we'll help. But so what happens is, generally speaking, we go through the week and we know what we're doing, what's expected of us. And it saves a lot of fights because you're just simply communicating. Because imagine what would happen tonight if I'm thinking I'm going to go after this podcast, I'm going to go to the gym and work out for a couple hours. But Rhonda's thinking I'm going to go pick up Peyton from play practice, but she didn't. We didn't communicate that, or we didn't get on the calendar. Then one person starts to feel really put upon, and then we do a daily war plan where we will just typically in the morning or at night before we go to bed, my wife will say something like this, hey, what's your day look like tomorrow? And she did it last night. Or I'll do the same thing. If we're together in the morning, hey, what's your day look like today? And I know we've already set the plan for the week, but we're over communicating to make sure that we're not either stomping on each other or completely neglecting each other, because those are the kind of things that create lots of problems. So those are some practical things I talk about. That's just one practical thing that, boundaries, roles, and expectations, and then those war plans. And then we can go bigger. Like I even challenge them to do a whiteboard, which is every 6 months. And every 6 months you sit down with a whiteboard and the best way to do this for a couple, Patrick, is I ask them to go away to like a hotel or someplace they can get away for a weekend for a couple of days. And so Friday night, at some point after going to see a movie or whatever, they pull out a whiteboard or a big yellow pad of paper or something, and they write down everything that their life consists of, everything, and just scatter it up there. Don't put it up nicely, just almost like vomit it up there. All the stuff you're doing, okay? Anything you think of that you do in a typical week, put it up there, okay? And then you look at it and you talk about it, and then the last thing you do is you pray. You pray. It's like, God, when we wake up in the morning, help us to have a clear idea of how to own our life in a godly way so it doesn't own us. So the next morning at some point, you get up and if it's on paper, you rip it off or you erase it so it's blank, clean slate. You pray, God, help us to have a life that honors you, something like that. And then you start putting stuff back up there in an orderly fashion. And nothing goes back up on the board without mutual consent. And some of the things will go right back up, go to work, go to church, that kind of stuff. But what you want to do is you'll put a lot of thought into what do you want your life to look like the next 6 months? And that process, Patrick, has been unbelievable how God has used that process to save marriages. I've had couples do that and they quit their job and move. I've had couples do that and the wife wrote a book. They did the process and she's like, I want to write a book. And he's like, what? And he's like, how long have you wanted to write a book? She's like, probably about 5 years. Why did you never mention it? She's like, well, it just didn't seem like there was time for it or whatever. So she's written that book. Have kids. I've seen people do this and say, hey, you really want to have another kid? All right. So how are we going to make that work? And you just plan it out. Anytime I write a book, Patrick, my wife and I plan out the next 6 months because it's going to be a 6-month process. And she's like, my wife, she always says, all right, what are you saying no to? What are you taking off the list? I'm like, yeah, okay, I won't do this. And so what I'm talking about, those are really practical ways, the weekly plan, the daily plan, and the 6-month plan of just making sure that those boundaries, roles, and expectations are pretty clear. That's just one thing, dude. I got about 100 things I could talk about. That's one practical principle.
All right, well, maybe we'll dive into a couple of them. I wanted to comment on a couple of those things. You talked about the weekly game plan, and that's something that Jessica and I have been doing for several months, and something that I mentioned to the Dad Hackers community a lot to do is to sit down. We usually do Sunday evening. We plan out our meals for the week. I let her know when I have podcast schedules. She lets me know what she's doing with the kids, if there's appointments or whatever. And that has been extraordinary because, it only took like one time where I had a podcast interview lined up when I came home from work, and she didn't know about it till like an hour before it was about to happen. And let's say she was underwhelmed at that information. And that's on me as a leader of my home and not communicating. And so we just take a piece of notebook paper and put Monday through Sunday on it, and we plan out our meals for the week. We put the big, like you say, the big rocks. We know Thursday night's date night. Monday night, the boys are going to stay up late. We're going to hang out with them. Tuesday night, the girls are going to stay up late. We're going to hang out with them and those kinds of things. And then when you talk about the 6-month plan, I haven't done one of those with my wife, but I really see what you're talking about there, and people making revolutionary changes in their lives, because what we end up doing is we just live day to day or week to week. And if you're just tweaking week to week, that's good on some level, but you're not going to make major trajectory shifts unless you're looking further out than a week. And I can really see how, you look 6 months out and you're saying, okay, I want to write a book. Well, we got to cut this out. We have to switch this around. We have to do this, and then we can make it happen. Or maybe we can't. I don't know. But
absolutely. No, I've said no to books because like I that's a great point. Like I've said no. I had a book that it was tied to a theme of a North American Christian convention. And I was talking to the committee, and they asked me if I would consider, long story short, in the meeting, I was like, absolutely, I'll write that book. And I'm going back to the airport that afternoon, and we had a 6-month plan and agreed that I wouldn't do a book for a while. And I called my wife. I was like, hey, guess what? I have a chance to write a book for the North American. I mean, it'll probably sell easily, because of the North American, it'll probably sell 15,000 copies right at the bat. And she's like, we talked about this. And I was like, what? She's like, we talked about this last week, that you're not going to write a book. And I was like, you're right. You're right. And she was right. And so I called him and said, I'm not going to do it. And I'm glad I didn't. But no, in what happens, Patrick, it gets part of your DNA. So our 29th wedding anniversary is next week. We're already talking about what we're going to do for our 30th wedding anniversary, even though it's a year away, because we think in terms of like, okay, we need to plan ahead or it's not going to happen. And it's not all about me. It's not all about her. It's about us. These plans are like, what can we do to make us what God wants us to be, and our family what He wants our family to be. And I cannot tell you how many times I've done that process and thought I would not have made this decision, or she would not have made this decision without doing this. Like we would have just stumbled through this next 6 months. And a lot of things happen every day, every week that you don't plan for every month. But it's it does take the stress level down quite a bit. I know, generally speaking, every day what's expected of me, where I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do, and same thing with Rhonda. So like I know, she knows exactly what's happening tonight. And so, like, for example, we're going to go see my daughter tomorrow. We're going to go tonight, actually. But our whole plan was built around the fact that we just knew what was happening this week. And so it allows room to get a lot of stuff done. Because people ask me all the time, how do you get so much stuff done? It's because I'm very organized, and my wife and I are on the same page. And she does not resent my traveling. She does not resent my speaking, because she's a part of the decision making. Like, she's a part of it. Like, I'm not going to accept stuff without running it by her. And so since she's a part of it, then she's cool with it. She's like, yeah, like he wasn't gone for 3 days without me knowing about it. I knew he was going to be gone 3 days. I knew a month ago. Yeah. By the way, she knows that because we also share a calendar. So that's one of the cool things. We've really we use the iCal on our iPhones, and that's been incredibly helpful. We're like 3 times a day, she's added something to our calendar, date night, or, one of the things is pick up the kids. She adds it to the calendar. I can accept it or reject it. I always accept it. But that helps too.
Yeah. A little ninja tip there. Always accept it. Yeah.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. So this question kind of stems from something you mentioned, and one of the guys, I threw a post in the Facebook group, said I was going to be talking to a marriage coach, best marriage coach in the world, best marriage coach. And I asked guys, what are your questions? And some of them were like sarcastic, funny things. And one of the guys asked about, are women ever in the mood? And earlier when you first started talking about marriage coaching, you talked about people's sex lives, like,
oh yeah,
non-existent or dysfunctional. And one of the things is, you mentioned people bringing projects literally into the bedroom, whether it's mentally or literally they're working on their laptop in the bedroom. But, and then we talked about, resentment building because of these roles, expectations, and boundaries not being clarified. And then resentment and bitterness sets in. And then I know it's hard for women to open up whenever those things are going on. But what do you, in your experience, I guess, what do you think contributes to that, and what can a husband do in that area to help?
Okay, I want to answer the guy's
coherent question.
No, that's a good question. No, I want to go back and answer the question that led up to what you asked. Is she ever in the mood? Well, a lot of that depends on you, on the guy. Yes, it's interesting. Yeah, we deal with a lot of sexual stuff in the conversations and the coaching sessions I have with couples. And I will just go and tell you, we talk about in terms of couples when things are healthy, assuming all of the things are equal, assuming that the people are healthy, there's no physical problems, there's no abuse happening, twice a week. Couples need to be having sex twice a week. And there are at least 3 kinds of sex, and we can talk about that later on, that couples need to be having. But often if your wife is not in the mood, because women get in the mood too, but often when they're not in the mood, it's because, first of all, it could be because the schedule is out of control, that they feel like they have no energy because they get no rest, because they have no margin in their life, because either they're doing it by themselves, or the roles haven't been clarified, or he's not helping, or he is helping but not in the right way. I mean, some of it's on them, but I think I take personal responsibility for my wife being in the mood. And what that looks like is me speaking her love language, me serving her, me loving her as Christ loves the church, me building her up, me spending time talking to her, investing in her. You can't just ignore your wife all week long and show up on Friday night and expect to punch the card. It's not how it works. So, but yes, often when women aren't in the mood, they get grief for that. But sometimes it's the guy's fault because he's not investing emotionally or through communication. Because a wife does not want to have sex with a man with whom she does not feel connected, because it's more than just a physical act for her. It's about words, it's about feeling, it's about motion, it's about emotions, about feeling, like I said, connected. So yes, if you're not having sex twice a week, here's the thing that really concerns me: when couples aren't having sex, like they're having sex like once a month. For me, that's like a red light flashing on a dashboard. It's a really bad sign. We should be having sex on a regular basis. And if you're not, you need to stop, look at your schedule, look at your lives, have some really hard conversations why that's not happening. Because it may be because she doesn't feel attracted to you, maybe because you don't feel attracted to her, it may be because you're too busy, it may be because you put the kids first. I will say this: when it comes to the bed, it's sacred space. And so I'm a huge advocate of no work in bed and no kids in bed. The only time kids are in bed is if they're sick, but they're only there for a little while, because I have seen this growing trend of co-sleeping. And it's just, for me, it's really disturbing, because if your kids are sleeping with you, you're most likely not having sex if they're in the bed with you. And one of my concerns is that I have seen it, and it sometimes becomes where the kid is kind of being used, because I've seen kids I've heard of kids sleeping with their parents, when they're in elementary school, and that kid is not at school bragging that he still sleeps with his mom and sleeps in his mom and dad's bed. But what happens is the kid kind of becomes like a shield sometimes. I'm not saying every case. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. But I think that space needs to be protected because it's sad to me how many times I worked with a couple and it was basically they were using their child as a shield against having sex, against connecting with their spouse. And that's just not cool. So yeah, intimacy is crucially important to a relationship. And if the way I say it, man, it's kind of just, hopefully you don't have to edit this out, but if a couple's not having sex on a regular basis, their relationship is screwed. So there you go.
I like the pun you have there. You were talking about, this is what I wanted to say. Little disclaimer for you guys listening to this episode. Don't go home to your wife and say, I heard on the Dad Hackers podcast that we need to be having sex twice a week. So now we have to have sex twice a week. That's a good goal to work for. But if these underlying things that Arron's talking about aren't in place, don't try to throw this as the trump card that, Arron said this on the Dad Hackers podcast. I don't want guys like abusing this episode. Not that they would. I don't think any of my guys would do that, but just had to throw that disclaimer out there. Why 2 times a week? Just curious.
Because it's a regular connection. It's like sometimes, I mean, an ordinary couple may have sex once a week, Friday night, Saturday night. That's kind of it. Having sex 2 times a week, it messes with the paradigm because you have jobs, you have lives, you're busy, you got kids, and there's lots of excuses, lots of reasons not to have sex. But what I say twice a week because it keeps it a priority, and it also keeps it a part of the schedule more than just on the weekends. Because some couples is like, we only have sex on the weekends. Well, here's the thing. Sex is God's idea, and it's a powerful force in our marriage and a powerful force for keeping a couple connected. And sometimes if God, is in it, then, and you need to have sex on Monday afternoon, you need to have sex on Monday afternoon. Now, it's not all, like I was saying earlier, I talk about in terms of, there's at least several kinds of sex, because it's not all, bells and whistles. But sometimes, I say more than it's twice a week just because it needs to happen more than just on Friday night or Saturday night.
Yeah. What are the 3 kinds? Now you've baited me with that. I'm very curious.
Dude, of course. Well, all of it is moral. All of it's moral. And it needs to be, here's my guiding principle for that, Patrick, when it comes to sex, because I'll get asked, what's okay, what's not okay. Well, first of all, if God says it's not okay, it's not okay. I've had couples suggest all kinds of things that pornography is not okay. Having a third party in your sex life is not okay. I'm not making this up. And so it's not okay if God says it's not okay. And it's also not okay if your spouse says it's not okay. You may hear from your buddies, something fun they're doing in their sex life. But if your spouse is not up for it, you don't do it. You don't push it. It's not okay if your spouse says it's not okay. And so the different kinds of sex, first of all, are the first is ministry sex. And that is, you have sex as an act of ministry. 1 Corinthians 7 teaches that my body belongs to my wife, her body belongs to me, and that we should not deprive each other except for prayer, so we don't give Satan a foothold on our marriage. So ultimately, sex needs to be looked at as an act of ministry. And so ministry sex, is crucially important. Maintenance sex, sometimes you have sex just because you have to. And
Man,
maintenance sex...
I hate when you just have to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. But it'd be like you're going to go on a trip for a couple of weeks, and your wife says, hey, I know you're going to be gone for a couple of weeks. We're having sex tonight. I'm not really in the mood, so tonight's all about you. And it's just having those honest conversations, and just sometimes like you have sex just because you have to. It's like changing the oil. It's, she's frustrated, you're frustrated, and it's because you haven't had sex in a while. And so you just make it happen. You slip into a closet, you lock the kids out of your room. I can't tell you how many times we had sex with our kids banging on our bedroom door trying to get in. It's just, you got to grab those times, especially when you're a parent. And then the third kind of sex is the kind of sex you read about in the Bible, in Proverbs, where you're told to drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. And I call it monkey sex. just because it has an M and it works. Sometimes sex needs to be passionate and just crazy and fun and romantic, and keep the fire going. Now that may only happen once a month, but if it's not happening at all, if all your sex is just maintenance sex or just it's an act of ministry, you're missing an important dynamic to your sex life. There needs to be passion, keep the fire going, romance, whatever floats y'all's boat, as long as it's godly and your spouse is okay with it, then keep that as a part of your sex life. I could give you stories and I could, but I figure that's enough detail for now.
Yeah, that's good. I didn't want the whole podcast to be all about that, but I know that's one of the things that's in the forefront of our minds as men, like every 3 seconds. You mentioned you do a lot of high accountability with the couples that you coach, and you mentioned homework. How do you implement accountability in your coaching, or like, I'm trying to think of like how we can take some of this stuff home, so to speak, and begin implementing what you're talking about.
Yeah. So if I was working with you and Jessica, which I'm not, let's say I was working with you and Jessica, I may say something like, okay, you're going to have a date night this week. And based on our conversation, Patrick, you're going to set up the date night and you're going to pick the place. You're going to take care of babysitting. You're going to cover all the details. So Jessica doesn't have to do it every single time. Okay. And then we'll say, Jessica, one of your bits of homework this week is to, you guys are going to have a discussion about your boundaries, roles, and expectations. And you're going to make sure that you guys have a conversation on Sunday night about your week. Now, Patrick, I need you to start it, but I need Jessica, I need you to be thinking about how you've not been communicating as you want to communicate. And so when you have that conversation, you'll be able to say what you want to say. Now, my homework is based on things we've talked about in our call, specific problems or challenges they're facing in their relationship. So we'll nuance it based on kind of what they need to work on. But that's pretty standard, those things. And then, I may say, hey, Patrick, your homework this week on top of, scheduling a date night is I need you to go ahead and write that letter to that relative who really hurt you. Now, you're not going to send it, but I want you to get it all out. If you've ever written an email that you didn't send, it feels pretty good. It feels like you sent it. And so I want you to go ahead and write that letter, and then we'll talk about it in our next session to kind of see what you came up with. But no, it's stuff like that. It's pretty practical. And then I check on it. I write it down. And then when we talk again, I'll be, hey, Patrick, let me hear that letter you wrote to that relative who hurt you really bad. And we'll talk about that. Or, hey, how'd your date night go? Or how's your weekly game plan going?
Yeah, that's great. Because I know personally in my life, if somebody challenges me in that way or gives me, quote, an assignment, and I know that next week I'm going to have to face you, Arron, and I know you're going to ask me about it, I'm probably a little bit more likely to follow through and initiate on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And a common one is you were talking another common bit of homework that is pretty much it's added to every assignment is, oh yeah, and all that, Patrick, I need you to be the one who sets up our next appointment. Because it's most of the time, honestly, I get contacted by the wife because she's desperate that their marriage be fixed. It's very rare that a guy actually contacts me and asks, to set up an appointment. And so when I start working with couples, I really put on the guy as a spiritual leader to be the one who sets up the appointments, unless it's a one-on-one with his wife over Zoom or something like that. Otherwise, I want the guy to set up the appointments.
Gotcha. When we first started our conversation, Arron, you mentioned that there were a lot of similar problems and maybe themes that you noticed since you've been doing this coaching. What are some of the top things that you see as patterns that generally happen in marriages that come to you?
Okay, communication is a big one, and how I find myself spending a lot of time with couples, helping them to understand the differences between men and women, how we use words and how we process words. And so that's a huge deal. The boundaries, roles, and expectations, as I already mentioned, that's a big thing I talk about quite often. We do talk about family history and get into how that impacts what you look for in a spouse, how you treat your spouse. You think about it, when you get married, you've interacted with one woman for, the majority of your life. And so naturally you're going to have a rhythm there, and you may gravitate towards that kind of woman in your wife, or the opposite. And so we talk about that, family history, and some of the other things that happen. How to fight fair. That's probably, on the list of top things we talk about on a regular basis, is how to fight, and that it's a healthy part of a relationship to be able to process arguments and disagreements in a productive way. Yeah, that's probably my short list.
That's a good list, man. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how to fight fair? I know that's, and I think that rolls into family history too. Like what you saw growing up of how your parents fought is probably how you're going to fight, just like how your parents disciplined and brought you up is usually how you end up disciplining and bringing your children up, unless you learn differently. So what are some principles for fighting fair? Because we know it's going to happen.
Yeah, I'll use an analogy that I use. So picture a house with a front porch, and everybody has problems. Everybody has challenges they got to face. So imagine you're standing in your front porch, and a big old pile of manure drops on your front porch. Okay, you have some options. Okay, one option is you can step in it, which means you're not being careful. You're not paying attention. And so sometimes when we have hard times, challenges come up in our relationship, we step in it, and we end up making a really big mess. And so that's an option. Another option is this: a big old pile of manure lands on your porch, and you decide to lay down in it and roll around in it. And this is when somebody plays the victim, or they identify with their problems. Now, when this happens in a fight, your spouse just constantly is like, "Well, I'm nothing. I'm pathetic," or "I'm like this because my mom or dad didn't love me," or whatever journey they had. It's actually changing the subject. It's not really dealing with it. But when someone plays the victim, they roll around in the manure. They end up stinking, and no one wants to be around them because they stink. Okay, and so that's not helpful. Another option is this: when that manure falls on the porch, you push it to the side, and then another bit falls on the porch. You push it to the side. You don't deal with it. You just push it out of the way, and you do that for years and years and years and years and years. Eventually, when you're not dealing with it, you've created this huge fortress of manure. You're surrounded by a fortress of manure, and the only way out of it is to go through more manure, and you feel kind of hopeless. And this is when a couple doesn't deal with anything. They just always push it to the side or change the subject. So what I want to do, to use that analogy, is I want couples to create a field, because if you put manure in a field, it is powerful. It leads to growth. It leads to fruit. It's energy. And so it's all about intentionality. So big thing I work on with couples is to help them to be very intentional with their fights, with their frustrations. And don't step in it. Don't roll around in it. Don't avoid it. Find something productive to do with the pain. And so we teach couples how to have, conversations, how to process things in a fair way, how to, seek to understand before you're understood. And there are a lot of tools associated with that. But that's a general image that I use with couples, and it kind of helps them to see, okay, we need to do something productive with our pain, with our frustrations, because right now we're just making a mess, or we're not dealing with it. So we just feel hopeless because we're surrounded by all this stuff we've not dealt with.
Yeah, man. As you were going through that, I could see myself in my wife, in our communication, in our fights. I could see those different stepping in it, rolling around in it, pushing it to the side. And I really like the field analogy at the end. You got to use it, intentionality. Arron, as we begin to wrap up here, what you have the ear of quite a few men right now, and what would you want to say to them with respect to marriage that you feel men need to hear right now?
Okay, when it comes to your marriage, I would start with being the spiritual leader and what that looks like. And it looks like a few things. It looks like being Jesus to your wife. The primary relationship in the home is between the husband and the wife. Okay, I mean, obviously it's a given. We have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. But this side of heaven, the primary relationship is in the home. And men, we need to love our wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And there's so much going on there. Like, I love that image of Jesus presenting the church to God. And men, how would it impact our lives if we lived with the reality that we're going to have to present our wives to God, and they're either going to be broken and shattered or spotless and blameless? And that's all from Ephesians. Another thing I want guys to know in regards to spiritual leadership is that a definition I use for spiritual leadership that I find to be really helpful is we create an environment in our home where faith in God can be expressed naturally. And so, that involves our relationship with our wife and our kids. Are we creating the kind of environment where kids can pray whenever? We pray whenever. Bad day, we pray. Scared to death, we pray. Happy, we sing songs about Jesus. We listen to worship music. We don't just do it when the preacher's around. We have that atmosphere all the time. And the third thing is this, Patrick, there's a teaching for elders in Timothy where Paul talks about a good elder is a man who manages his household well. And that word for manage it has two parts to it. The word is prostomai, and it has two parts, pro and stomai. Pro means before, stomai means to stand. And I love that image because it's a military word, and it describes a good elder as a man who stands before his family. It's like you picture a military guy on watch, standing on a wall, and behind him, people can sleep and relax and train and prepare because there's somebody watching their back. And so this guy's not standing, towards his fellow soldiers. He's standing before them. And so what it looks like is, men, are we creating an environment where our kids are safe, where our wife can flourish, where God can be glorified? Because there's not constant threats, because we're on the wall for our family. Like, we're standing there. You know what it'd be like as spiritual leaders in our homes if our wives understood, like, we're standing there saying, hey, you do your thing, I got it, and nothing's going to get to you or the kids without going through me. And if it tries to come through me, we're having a fight. If Satan tries to get to my family, we're going to have a fight. And so that, I love those three images of what it means to be a spiritual leader. And I think guys often, when things start to break down, they break down because we're neglecting our duty as a spiritual leader. We're not being Jesus. We're not creating an environment where faith in God can be expressed naturally, and we're not on guard protecting our family from things that can destroy it. So, yeah, that's my thought there.
That is an excellent thought. I really like the illustration in the 3 points there of what being a spiritual leader looks like. And that's extremely helpful, because we can read the passages about being a husband or being a father, but what's that look like practically? And I appreciate you giving those 3 quick points there. Well, Arron,
Yep.
we're bumping up against the end of time here. If somebody wants to reach out to you to look into marriage coaching, or to read some of your books, get a hold of some of those, or some of the other resources that you have, what's the best way that they can connect with what you have going on?
Sure. For my books, the best way to just go to Amazon and spell my name correctly, Arron, and all my books are out there, Arron Chambers. I have a website too, arronchambers.com, once again, Arron. And then, if they want to email me, they can email me at arronchambers.com, and I'll get that.
Cool, man. I'll put all that stuff in the show notes as well, so you guys can link it up right there. Well, Arron, thanks again for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it. And you've just added so much value to me, and I know the other guys are going to feel the same way. And I just appreciate your wisdom, your insight, and your experience and your time today. So thank you very much, brother.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, gentlemen, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope our conversation was a blessing to you, and that you leave this episode better equipped to be the man and the father God has called and created you to be. If so, then I ask that you please leave us a 5-star rating and a quick written review in iTunes. Then make sure you head on over to the show notes to get all of the resources for this episode. While you're there, you can take part in our 5 Days to Be a Better Dad challenge, as well as get involved with our free Facebook community. All right, gentlemen, until next week, remember Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Stay sharp.